Jesus himself said that the words we read in Matthew 22:37 and 39 are the great commandments, not the good commandments. And the Apostle Paul did not call love something that is good. Instead, he said, the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians 13:13. The power of seeking to be great rather than good became clear when I read Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't, in which he began with the opening line, good is the enemy of great. With the encouragement of my publisher, I elected to write a book on churches modeled on the Good to Great framework. This book was inspired by Good to Great, and we borrowed the research process, the structure and outline of the book, and the architecture of its ideas as the blueprint for this work. The difficulties in finding great churches. Think of some criteria to measure great churches. Attendance increases, number of conversions, impact on culture, transformed lives. If you have settled on one or more criteria, name 50 churches that would meet them. Can you name 40 churches? 30? Let's make the search more difficult. Think of churches that meet your great criteria after being a so-so church for many years. In other words, discover some churches that have made the leap to greatness. Let's make the test even more problematic. Name all the churches that have made the transition without changing the senior pastor or senior minister. In other words, the church broke out under the same leadership. If you are having trouble naming several such churches, you have a taste of the difficulties the research team encountered in this project. We believe quite simply that there are very few breakout churches in America. In fact, although we have data on thousands of churches, we found only 13 churches that survived the rigorous screening. But the lessons we learned from these churches are priceless. Figure 1A offers a quick snapshot of the incredible leaps taken by breakout churches. Following the research methodology used by Jim Collins in Good to Great, we compared the 13 churches we found with a carefully selected control group of churches that failed to make the leap. The factors distinguishing one group from the other fascinated our team. As just one point of comparison, the chart looks at worship attendance of the two groups of churches. The breakout churches had a clearly identified point at which they began to experience significant growth. Drawing upon the Good to Great terminology of transition point, we called this juncture the breakout point. We then took the 5 years preceding and the 5 years following the breakout point and compared the same years with the direct comparison churches. For the 5 years prior to breakout, all of the churches were struggling to stay even in worship attendance. Then the difference between the two groups is dramatic. The average worship attendance of the comparison churches declined for the next 5 years, while in the breakout churches it increased 71%. How did churches with very unremarkable pasts become great churches? What took place in these fellowships that made them so extraordinary? How did these churches make the leap when more than 90% of American churches did not come close to doing so? Can a good but plodding church become a great church? We believe the answer is an unequivocal yes. We hope the stories you are about to read will inspire you to move your church to greatness. Before we get too caught up in the details, let's hear from one church that made the transition, but not without a great sacrifice at great cost. The Temple Church faces the cost of making the leap. The Temple Church opened its doors for its first worship service at the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville, Tennessee in 1977. The congregation subsequently met in 2 other borrowed facilities before constructing its own buildings in 1980. The founding pastor was Bishop Michael Lee Graves. By most standards, the Temple Church was successful from its inception. Growth was steady, if not spectacular, in the early years. A Christian private school began. An adjunctive ministry, Samaritan's Ministries, reached out to the inner city of North Nashville by providing nutritional support for the hungry, medical assistance, spiritual and psychological counseling, and educational and vocational training. One leader in the community credited the Temple Church with playing a major role in reducing drug and gang violence in the area. The list of Temple's ministries exceeded 50 and was growing. The church was one of the most respected African-American churches in the early 1980s. A multi-million-dollar facility was complete. The members began to see their identity with the church as a banner of prestige. The Temple Church, by most standards, was making a difference. Then the crash came.